Continuing, I got as far as page 8, and where it says cultural diversity in the United States. North America may originally have been settled primarily by Caucasian Christians of European descent, but the population today is much more diverse. And I said, where were the Indians? And then it goes through and it lists all kinds of minorities that live in the United States, and Native Americans were never mentioned. What was he thinking? So, historical perspectives on sex. An interesting place to start, if you really want to get historical, is the Old Testament. The Old Testament, as I heard one black preacher very adamantly saying one day, that the United States, our families, our neighborhoods, dysfunctional families, our cities are full of dysfunctional families, our states, our country, our world, dysfunctional families. He said, you want to see some dysfunctional families? Read the Old Testament. I think he was on to something. Several of the stories, I find that when a woman reads them, she may interpret them differently than a man would. The story of Lot, Sodom, and Gomorrah, that one has always fascinated me. So I remember vividly, okay, you know, Sodom and Gomorrah was a place of great evil. Everybody was sinning all over the place. Lot, for reasons that I can't recall, moved there with his wife and his virgin daughters. 2 of them. Or maybe more, but 2 are what we hear about. So they're there, and angels come to visit Lot. Okay, angels. The whole population of the village is running out saying, bring them out, bring these men out so that we may know them. Now, in the Old Testament, when you know someone, it meant carnally, in the biblical sense. You had sex with them. So basically, Sodom and Gomorrah is interpreted as all of these villagers wanted these 2 angels, these men, angels, what have you, to come out so they could have sex with them. Weirdly enough, that was a way of bringing new people into a very tight-knit village. If they would not accept anal intercourse at least once, they didn't get in. So Lot, knowing that his angels couldn't protect themselves against a mob of people, locked all these people out and said, leave these guys alone, I'll give you my 2 virgin daughters. Well, I was a virgin daughter sitting in church when I first heard that tale. I think I was about 12, and the idea that my father could hand me over to a raping mob and be still considered a righteous man was more than horrifying, if you don't mind my saying so. So, under whatever circumstances, I don't remember that either, but Lot takes off to the mountain with his wife and his daughters, and his wife and they were told, don't look back, just don't look back. And God swoops in and destroys the city, and Lot's wife turned around and looked back and was turned into a pillar of salt. Lot, with his 2 virgin daughters, goes up into the mountain where the virgin daughters, according to the biblical interpretation, they decided they wouldn't have a chance to have babies. So let's get Dad real drunk and we will sleep with him and we'll get pregnant and then we can have babies. And when Lot came out of the wilderness with his 2 daughters, there were children. And so that story that Lot tells, it's Lot telling the story after all. My daughters got me drunk and they seduced me. Not my fault. And I'm reading this story and I'm going, gee, in every tale I've heard about a father or a stepfather molesting his daughter, his excuse was, she seduced me. It's not my fault. I had sex with a 9-year-old. She seduced me. You know, it wasn't my idea. So, but I mean, you go through the Old Testament, you can find tons and tons and tons of stuff about sex. In fact, here's an interesting reference. I don't know if you can see that well or not. It's called Queen Jane's Version of the Bible. I wouldn't recommend getting it as a gift for a devout family. It's going to fall on my head. Because it's been rewritten, but it's also got little icons next to key passages that tell you that there's sex going on here, that there's kinky sex going on here, that there's homosexual sex going on here. And while the verses, the whole story hangs together pretty much the same as a traditional Bible, it is written from a more profane point of view. But just those icons pointing out when the sex was very helpful to me, because they disguised the words in the Old Testament. For instance, in the Old Testament, feet was a term used when they meant genitalia. In the Old Testament, they make mention of making vows where you swear to another man, such will be so, and you put his hand on his thigh to swear. Thigh? No. The old system was you took a hold of his genitalia and he took a hold of yours, and you're in a position of absolute ultimate trust. You don't hurt mine, I don't hurt yours. Okay? We're good? Good. So the swearing by putting his hand between his thighs was actually a real gesture of trust. I've often wondered if the situation, there are tales now where when the Europeans, Columbus, his little group, shows up here on these shores, and the Indians, being fairly primitive natives, went out to greet them in a manner you would go out to greet a stranger, and reached out to put their hands on the white man's genitalia. The white men, not sharing this custom at this time, shot them. Because, for heaven's sakes, these must be savages to do this. So, but when men meet each other and reach out and shake hands, is that a vestige of that old gesture? I don't know. No way to prove it. Anyway, you want to read about sex in the Bible, also check out Leviticus. There's all the rules are there, and you'll find out that the rules for women were very, 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 very severe, because women were unclean. Once a month they were unclean. After childbirth they were unclean. And they were unclean longer if they'd had a baby girl than if they'd had a baby boy. I guess there's twice as the potential for blood there. So, Aristotle. Hey, he was pretty smart, right? That's what we hear. But he didn't have a perfect grasp of everything. He had a phenomenal grasp of certain things, and because he was that smart, they just assumed he must be that smart in all areas. And so he BS'd a lot, and it was taken as absolute truth, and it was just almost heresy to question what he had said. His idea, reproduction, men have sperm. Now, how they knew this, I don't know. How they knew Old Testament times about sperm being the seed, that was pretty consistent through history. The woman's egg was not as well known. They were thought just to have this weird stuff, all this blood and clots and stuff that under proper circumstances could unite together and form a baby. And those proper circumstances seemed to be that you needed the sperm. And so Aristotle thought that inside each little sperm, just as like inside each little acorn, my screen went off. Inside the acorn is the potential for the oak tree. So inside a sperm is a completely formed itty bitty teeny tiny human being. And all you had to do is plant it. Now, it's that view of biology that made it one of the big sins for spilling your seed. Because if every time a guy had an emission, every time he ejaculated, 6 million souls were going to hell. That's a pretty scary thought. That's a lot of guilt to throw on a guy. But let's see, where were we going with that? So Aristotle thought that when a sperm was implanted into the woman's body, then it just had the right place to continue growing. Some primitive tribes think that once you have put the semen inside the female, you have to keep putting it in to make sure that there's enough semen to grow a baby. And presumably it's even more if you want to grow a male baby. So a young girl who would become pregnant, her father would lock her into a hut with the guy that got her pregnant so that he could continue to contribute to that baby. We don't think it's quite that way now. What else did it? So Aristotle was pretty far off on that. As you went further through history, they decided that women had all of the stuff you need to make a baby, except for what the man contributes, and that would be a soul. And in fact, it wasn't until the year like 500 that the Catholic Church in the Vatican, in a hard-fought debate, finally decided and voted that the women also have souls. Kind of a different thing. So it's nice that we've had souls for what, 1,500 years now. I mean, that's good. St. Augustine, boy, wasn't he a kick in the pants. Nice little information about him. Yes, he had girlfriends, live-in girlfriends his whole time, and when he finally decided he would marry, it wasn't the woman he'd been living with all those years. Of course, he thought everybody else should abstain from sex because it's not good. And yes, between feces and urine we are born. How loathsome humans are. That's a hard way to go through life with that view of yourself. Chastity belts, those were a lot of fun. Indeed, some of these are anti-sex devices. We should get into that a little bit later. We're getting close to 15 minutes. I don't want it to cut me off and make me start over. So, may get back to you tonight, maybe not. It's getting on towards 1 o'clock. How do I stop it?